What happens when the people who were supposed to see you never even looked? When your own family gathers to celebrate success just not yours? And what if the person they underestimated holds the power to decide their future? This isn't a story about revenge. It's about respect turned the hard way, about silence turned into strength, and how one woman walked into a room that once ignored her and changed everything. Her name is Rachel Monroe, and this is the moment they finally had to listen. I hadn't been back to Hastings, Oregon in 6 years. The streets still curled along the edge of the bay like an old postcard, and the wind still carried the smell of pine sea salt and a town that had never expected me to return. I parked my rental in front of the house. I once called home white siding, blue shutters, a wreath on the door that read "Welcome Spring" in cursive, even though it was late summer. Inside, laughter spilled from the kitchen like a radio turned too high. I knocked once, then let myself in. No one noticed. Rachel came, a voice clipped and wine-sweet. "Pamela, my father's wife." "Oh, you actually came." She didn't stand. She didn't hug me. She barely looked up from her glass of Chardonnay. "I hope the flight wasn't too bad," she said, turning back to her tablet. I had driven 11 hours alone, with a suitcase full of navy slacks and emotional armor. The house was buzzing with wedding prep. Garment bags hung from the staircase railing. Florists rushed in and out. Someone was steaming napkins. Yes, napkins. Dylan, my father's son from his second marriage, was getting married the next day, and the house had been transformed into a pre-ceremony staging ground. No one offered me a drink. No one asked how the drive had been. I wandered into the living room, half expecting my father to greet me with that old half smile. Instead, he glanced over the top of a guest list and gave a distracted nod. "There she is. Good of you to make it." I gave a polite smile. "Hi, Dad." He pointed toward the kitchen. "You remember Liz and Marty, right? Two of Pamela's best friends, both in floral dresses and pearls." Pamela called over. "This is Rachel. She's the one who used to work with trucks or something, right?" There it was. I blinked. I used to work logistics support in Boston after trade school. That was over a decade ago. "Oh, right," she said, waving it off. "You've always been good with tools. Mechanical, practical stuff." I forced a smile. "I actually work in federal finance now." No one asked what that meant. They moved on to centerpieces. Dinner was worse. Dylan's fiancée Nicole was glowing in that bride-to-be way, and I meant that sincerely. She had a kindness to her, though I doubted she even knew my middle name. Dad leaned in proudly as Dylan talked about his company's pending merger, multi-million-dollar logistics consolidation deal. Pamela added, "He's leading the integration planning at 29. Isn't that remarkable?" "I can believe it," I said. No one heard me. "He's always had drive," Dad said, smiling into his red wine. "Not everyone's cut out for business leadership, but that's okay. We all have our roles." I swallowed hard. My salad suddenly felt like gravel. Nicole turned to me. "So what do you do again, Rachel?" Before I could answer, Pamela jumped in. "She works with electrical systems now, or wiring, I think. Something in the field. She's very hands-on." "Like a technician?" someone asked. "Exactly," Pamela said, grinning. "If anything goes wrong at the wedding tomorrow, we know who to call after." My father chuckled. Dylan didn't even look up from his phone. It wasn't shame I felt. Not anymore. It was something sharper, something cold. That night they gave me the old guest, roomy childhood bedroom. It smelled faintly of lavender sachets and boxed-up years. The floral comforter hadn't changed. Neither had the creaky ceiling fan or the faded picture of me in braces on the bookshelf. I unpacked slowly, not because I had much, but because I didn't want to sit. I didn't want to feel how small this space made me again. I opened my laptop to distract myself, and there it was, an email marked urgent. It was from the U.S. Financial Ethics Bureau, where I served as a senior auditor. I'd been assigned to initiate a high-priority internal audit, target Rockbridge, logistics Dylan's company, the merger. Everyone was bragging about. It had just become my job to investigate it. I stared at the screen, half in disbelief, half in a kind of twisted amusement. They had no idea. They never asked what I'd built outside of their circle, never saw past the grease-stained version of me. They kept in their heads, but tomorrow they would, not because I needed revenge, not because I wanted to embarrass them, but because I had stopped waiting to be seen, and started walking like someone who had already arrived. I used to think if I worked hard enough, they'd eventually see me, not applaud me, not celebrate, just see me. After Mom passed when I was 19, I didn't have time to grieve the way other kids did. She died in her sleep 3 months after her breast cancer went into remission. One day I was buying groceries for the dorm room fridge. The next I was planning a funeral. My father didn't fly out for the service. Said Pamela had the flu and he couldn't leave Dylan alone for that long. That was the first time I felt the shift, not a crash but a slow tilt, like gravity realigning without warning. I dropped out of school a month later, took the first job I could get at a garage in South Boston. I spent days under city buses and nights taking accounting classes online. I didn't have a plan, just bills to pay, and a younger half-sister from Mom's side to keep afloat. My friends went to tailgates in grad school. I cleaned oil out of my nails and taught myself to balance ledgers on my lunch breaks. Pamela sent a card that Christmas. It had a snowman on the front and a single line inside. Hope Boston's treating you well. No return address. Years passed, I got my degree. Quietly, no cap and gown. No champagne pop or proud photo on Facebook. Just a Tuesday night in a rented apartment with leftover Thai food and a passing grade in corporate audit law. I never told them. They never asked, even when I made it through the entrance process at the bureau. Even when I led my first audit. Even when my name was listed quietly without fanfare on the acknowledgments page of a federal white paper about compliance reform. They were still talking about how Dylan had made regional manager by 26. It was strange how I kept hoping they'd call, that my dad would reach out and ask what I was doing, how I was doing. But every holiday came and went with a group email invite to some Pamela-hosted brunch I was expected to fly across the country to attend if I could get time off from the garage. I stopped correcting them, let them believe I still wore steel-toed boots and carried a wrench. There was less disappointment in silence than in explaining yourself to people who'd already decided what you were. Sitting at the dinner table that first night back, watching everyone toast to Dylan's success. I felt like a framed photograph hung in a hallway. No one walked through anymore. Nicole, sweet as she was, kept referring to their honeymoon plans and their new condo the way people do when they know they're supposed to talk, but don't quite know their audience. I kept nodding, smiling, taking polite sips of water when Dylan launched into how he'd been handpicked to lead the integration of the Rockbridge Axelon merger. Pamela nearly teared up. He's worked so hard, she said, pressing her hand over her heart. You remember when he won that business leadership award at 16? Rick. My dad chuckled. Of course. Still have the plaque in my office. They turned to me then, almost like they'd remembered I existed. You ever win anything like that in school? Rachel Pamela asked, her voice light. Down, I won the state finance challenge when I was 17. A beat of silence, then a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh right, that thing with the calculators. I took another sip of water, the thing with the calculators. Later that night, walked down the hallway to the guest roomy old room, though it barely resembled it now. The bookshelf where my mom once stacked my library finds had been replaced with candle holders. My poster of the solar system was gone. A mirror now hung. In its place, there was a framed photo of Dylan on the dresser. High school graduation, Pamela stood next to him, her hand proudly on his shoulder. I wasn't in it. I sat on the bed and let the air settle around me, thick with old dreams and lavender dust. There was a box under the bed with some of my old notebooks. One of them had Monroe R written in block letters on the cover. Inside was a yellowed sheet from junior year, a balance sheet my mom helped me complete her handwriting. Circling my error and scribbling check your expenses twice, then trust your instinct. She was the only one who ever told me I had a mind for this kind of work. The only one who kept every certificate, every paper marked A, every minor award I brought home like it meant something. After she died, that belief was mine alone to carry. And I carried it like a flame in a jar, not to show off, not to light the room, just to survive the dark. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Fan blades as they turned above me, slow and steady like the hands of a clock I didn't ask to read. They had no idea what I'd built, what I'd sacrificed, what I was capable of. And maybe that used to hurt, but now it was something else. Entirely. Because for the first time in my life, the story they'd written about me, the quiet, greasy girl with the calloused hands, and no real direction, was about to collide with the truth. And I wouldn't need to say a word. The numbers would speak for me. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Willow House, a renovated barn-turned event space just outside of town. It had string lights, mason jar, centerpieces, and more linen than any of us could realistically spill wine on the kind. A venue that screamed rustic luxury. In every Instagrammable corner, Dylan arrived wearing a navy vest and a tie that matched Nicole's dress. He looked good, confident, ready, like someone who'd always known he belonged in rooms like this. I sat near the end of the long table next to an older couple who mistook me for catering staff until I gently corrected them. No one noticed or cared. Pamela stood up first, clinking her glass for attention. To my brilliant stepson, she began, beaming into the woman who's made him even better. The room raised their glasses. I lifted mine too. No one toasted to me, of course, but I wasn't there for that. Not anymore. Nicole Pamela continued, "You've joined a family built on hard work, trust, and vision. Dylan's father built this foundation, and Dylan's taking it even further." Dad smiled like someone who'd just been publicly knighted. I didn't say anything. Then Dylan stood, cleared his throat, and began talking about Rockbridge. Logistics. He spoke easily, confidently about the merger, how it would redefine shipping in the Western Corridor, how he'd been hand-selected to lead the integration team, how his leadership style, assertive but approachable, had been singled out by the executive board. Pamela nodded like she'd written the speech herself. The applause was loud. And then came the moment that still burns in my brain. Someone down the table asked, "So Rachel, what's your world like these days?" It was a kind question. Curious. Meant to include. I opened my mouth. But Pamela got there first. She's still working with trucks, I think she said, laughing gently. Or maybe it's electrical now. There was a pause. "She's good with tools," she added, raising her eyebrows, like that was some kind of badge of honor. We always knew she'd do something hands-on. Practical. Not everyone's cut out for desk jobs, right? The table chuckled. Even Dad smiled tight-lipped but amused. And Dylan, he didn't even look up from his phone. I said evenly, "I work in federal financial oversight. I lead compliance audits on major mergers." A few heads turned. Pamela blinked. "Oh, that's neat." Then she added too loudly, "Well, if something goes wrong with the wiring at the venue tomorrow, at least we'll know who to call." The laughter came again, but this time it echoed differently. I didn't laugh. I didn't speak. I just folded my napkin and set it beside my plate. The thing about being underestimated is it stops hurting once. You stop expecting anything else. They didn't know who I was. They never had. Back at the house, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection under harsh yellow light. My lipstick had faded. My eyes looked tired but sharp. I didn't feel broken. I felt still, cold, maybe controlled. I walked back into the Guest room slipped off my heels and opened my laptop. Notifications pinged in the corner updates, calendar changes, 2 flagged reports, and then there it was, a message from the Bureau Subject Audit Assignment Update, urgent body please. Confirm availability for immediate on-site initiation. Target Rockbridge Logistics. Lead contact Dylan R. Monroe. I stared at the screen. I wasn't surprised. Not really. Rockbridge had been on our radar for months, especially after a whistleblower flagged possible irregularities in consultant spending. Dylan's name hadn't appeared in those earlier briefings, but it didn't have to. It was a billion-dollar deal. Every executive was under scrutiny, and now it was mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had mocked me for working with tools, but I was about to bring every tool I had into that building and start turning over stones. One by one, I reread the assignment. This wasn't personal, it was professional. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel like fate. I closed my laptop slowly, took a deep breath, let it out. The hallway outside was dark and quiet. I could hear the hum of the fridge downstairs, the creak of Pamela's heels as she walked. Across the kitchen, maybe prepping tomorrow's itinerary with surgical precision, they were probably still laughing, still rehearsing the same family script. But tomorrow the curtain would lift, and I wouldn't be the forgotten guest at the end. Of the table, I'd be the one holding the red pen, the one asking the questions, the one who finally could not be ignored. The guest room door clicked shut behind me, like the soft seal of a vault. It was late past midnight, but sleep didn't come. The glow of the hallway nightlight slipped under the door like a ghost, but it wasn't that light that kept me awake. It was the walls. They hadn't changed. Faded wallpaper with tiny roses, a bookshelf, sagging under the weight of forgotten yearbooks, and old trophies, none of them mine. A framed photo of Dylan in his baseball uniform still sat on the dresser where my childhood mirror used to be. The bed creaked when I sat on it, still dressed hair, still pinned. I stared at the ceiling and felt 13 again, not in the nostalgic way, in the lonely way. There had been a time when this room felt like my universe, back when Mom would peek in with a mug of tea and a tired smile. Back when she'd sit at the edge of the bed and listen to me, read her case studies aloud, because I was convinced understanding balance sheets made me sound smart. She never once told me I was too serious. She never once made me feel small for dreaming big. I reached under the bed half knowing what I'd find. The storage bin was still there. Gray plastic, one cracked corner. Inside were old school folders. A faded SAT prep book. A yellowing manila envelope with my name on it. In Mom's handwriting, I opened it carefully. Inside were printouts of my early essays, a copy of my high school business competition win, and a certificate from a local accounting course I took when I was 15. In the corner of one document, she'd written in blue pen, "You have a mind like a compass. Trust Idovan when others don't." The lump in my throat caught me off guard for all the times I'd stood in rooms where no one listened. She always had. And now, all that was left was ink and memory. I sat on the floor, cross-legged like I used to, and pulled my laptop toward me. The audit file was still open. My name sat at the top, Rachel Monroe. Senior Auditor, Federal Financial Ethics Bureau. Not Pamela's stepdaughter, not Rick's disappointment, not the girl who used to fix alternators, just me. Credentials and integrity, facts and follow-through. I scrolled through the briefing packet. Dylan's company was clean on the surface. Glossy earnings reports, a glowing press release, and a brand new sustainability values section on their website that screamed corporate polish, but buried beneath the headlines were whispers, vendor inconsistencies, padded consultant fees, redacted payments that didn't quite add up. Tomorrow wasn't going to be a friendly check-in. It was going to be a reckoning, and I was the one holding the ledger. I finally lay down. Around 3 a.m., still dressed. My hair left a faint impression on the pillow, and the scent of old linen surrounded me like time. trying to reclaim something from down the hall. I could hear them. Pamela's voice muffled but unmistakable. My father's chuckle, Dylan talking too loudly about his vision for the next 5 years. It wasn't even personal anymore. They simply didn't see me. They never had. No one came to say goodnight. No one knocked. And somehow that hurt more than the laughter, because it confirmed the truth I'd been pushing away for years. In this house, I was a guest. In this family, I was an afterthought. And tomorrow, I'd be neither. Tomorrow, I'd be the one person they couldn't ignore, couldn't talk over, couldn't define. Not because I needed to be seen, but because they'd finally feel what it meant to be measured, and I was done shrinking to fit inside the silence. The next morning, the sky over Portland was iron gray, like a storm holding its breath. I arrived early at Rockbridge Logistics corporate headquarters, steel and glass jutting into the sky like ambition made physical. I sat in my car for a moment, letting the engine idle, staring at the company logo etched across the front windows. This was where Dylan worked. This was his empire, and today it became my jurisdiction. I pulled the clip badge from my briefcase and fastened it to my blazer. It caught the light. Rachel Monroe, lead auditor, U.S. Financial Ethics Bureau. No room for misinterpretation. I stepped out, walked through the sliding doors, and approached the front desk. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, polite but distracted. "Yes," I said calmly. "Rachel Monroe. I'm here for a scheduled audit with the executive team, federal assignment." She blinked, eyes widening as they dropped to my badge. "Of course. Please give me one moment." She picked up the phone, whispered into it, then gestured toward the elevators. "Conference room, 7A, top floor. Someone will meet you there." I didn't need someone to meet me. I already knew where I was going. The elevator ride was silent, except for the quiet hum of ascent. I checked my file again. My team would be joining remotely in 2 hours, but the initial briefing would be mine alone. I was glad for that. This part I needed to do myself. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into a sleek corridor. Of glass walls and polished wood. Light flooded through floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything about the space screamed, "We've made it." And then I saw him, Dylan, standing with a group of executives, men in matching blazers, laughing in that sharp, tight way corporate men do when they're still performing. His smile dropped the second he saw me. "Rachel," he said, stunned. "Morning," I replied coolly. "We're scheduled for 9. Correct." He blinked. "You're the lead auditor." I held up the file in my hand. "I am." A pause passed between us like a seismic shift. Then I walked past him and into the conference room, because it was mine now. Inside, Pamela was already seated, green suit, sleek ponytail, leather-bound planner in front of her. She looked up, expecting someone else. Her jaw tightened. "Oh," she said. "That's right," I answered. "Good morning, Pamela." She nodded stiffly. "You're conducting the review." "Yes," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. "This meeting initiates the Bureau's audit of Rockbridge's pending merger with Axelon Tech. We'll be conducting a compliance review of all Q2 expenditures, vendor agreements, and executive approvals." Pamela's lips pressed into a line. Dylan entered behind me, silent. Now a few other execs filtered in. Their eyes flicked between me and Dylan, like trying to solve a riddle. I didn't offer them help. I opened my laptop and connected to the Bureau's secured system. "Before we begin, I'll need full access to your Q2 discretionary spending reports, including consultant contracts and offshore vendor filings." There was a beat. Pamela cleared her throat. "I manage those files. They're restricted until internal clearance." I looked up, calm but firm. "Under federal compliance standards, that's insufficient. I'll need full access today." Her jaw ticked, but she nodded. "Of course." We began reviewing line items. The first few were standard travel software, third-party logistics. But by the third document, I'd flagged inconsistencies, 2 vendors with overlapping names, unusually high consultant retainer fees, and 1 offshore transaction, labeled International Strategy Services with no breakdown, all of them approved under Dylan's credentials. I made notes. I didn't look at him, but I could feel his posture shift. The confidence of rehearsal dinner. Dylan was gone. This one sat, straighter, quieter, like he wasn't sure what version of me had walked into the room. Good. That uncertainty belonged to him now. After an hour, I closed the laptop and announced a 15-minute break. Everyone filed out, except Dylan. He stayed behind, closing the door gently. "You're doing this to humiliate me," he said. I turned slowly. "No," I said, "I'm doing my job. What you feel is up to you." "You should have told me," he said, hands clenched. "Told you what I asked, that I worked for the agency that regulates your merger, that I spent the last 10 years building a career. None of you ever asked about." He was silent. "I didn't mean to. You didn't have to mean it," I said, voice low. "You just had to live it, and you did." We stared at each other for a long time. Finally, he said, "If this deal falls apart, I lose everything." I nodded once. "Then I suggest you make sure the numbers add up." Then I walked out past him, past the glass walls, past the polite smiles of people, now very unsure of where they stood. Because today I wasn't the girl at the edge of the dinner table. I was the line in the ledger they never thought would matter. The room felt colder when I returned from the break, or maybe I'd just stopped pretending I didn't notice the chill. The executives filed back in one by one, quieter. Now their smiles had dulled, replaced by the cautious expressions of people who knew the tone had shifted and not in their favor. Pamela returned last. She'd changed into a softer blouse, trading her corporate armor for something more cooperative, but her eyes still held the sharpness of someone preparing for a fight. She couldn't admit she was losing. She placed a folder in front of me. "Here's everything you requested," she said curtly. "No more nicknames, no condescension, just Rachel." I nodded. "Thank you." The room settled. I opened the folder and began reviewing the documents. A hush followed. Every page I flipped, every red mark I made, every brief pause I allowed to linger just long enough to make them sweat. Vendor duplication, unusual consulting fees, and 1 offshore account again labeled as miscellaneous strategy, this time in a currency not previously disclosed. "This was not reported in your preliminary filings," I said. Eyes on the page. Pamela didn't flinch. "It's within compliance. You're welcome to verify." "I will," I said already. Drafting the internal flag in my system, we moved through the rest of the report in steady silence. Then I turned to Dylan. "There's a discrepancy in this security contract. The expense is nearly double the industry standard. Can you explain?" Shifted. I'd have to look into the documentation again. I slid the paper toward him. "You signed it 2 weeks ago." He looked down. His own signature stared back at him like a mirror he didn't want to face. The silence that followed was deafening. Something cracked in the room, not loudly but cleanly. The image they'd built around him had been paper thin, and it was starting to tear. When the review concluded, Shannon Lee from Axelon Tech, the acquiring company, asked to speak with me. Privately, we stepped into an adjoining office. The glass walls gave us full view of the others, shuffling awkwardly in the next room. She shut the door. "I didn't know you were Dylan's sister," she said. "Half-sister," I corrected. "And full auditor." She smiled. I liked that her tone shifted more serious. "Listen, I've seen 3 mergers crash and burn over numbers like these. But your review, calm, clear, precise. No ego. Just facts," I said. "The numbers don't care who signs them." She nodded. "That offshore account. If we move forward, what's your recommendation?" "Full documentation within 5 business days," I said without hesitation. "If it's not submitted, we delay approval and report it to DOJ compliance." Shannon didn't blink. "That's exactly what I told my board I'd expect." She extended a hand. Thank you, Rachel. You're the kind of oversight this industry needs more of. I shook it. Firm steady outside the door, Pamela was pacing. Dylan sat slouched in a chair, staring at the table like it had betrayed him. They still hadn't spoken to me directly since the review resumed, but they didn't have to. The silence spoke volumes. They weren't in charge of the room anymore. I was, and I hadn't needed to raise my voice. Once. 2 weeks later, the merger was officially frozen. The DOJ flagged the consultant payments and offshore discrepancies for further investigation. It didn't make headlines, these things rarely. Inside Rockbridge's boardroom, it landed like a silent grenade. Dylan was quietly removed from the project. Pamela's consulting contract was reevaluated, which in corporate speak meant terminated quietly, discreetly, with no public drama. Just an ending. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. Back in DC, my apartment greeted me with silence. The good kind, the kind you earn. I dropped my keys on the counter and exhaled, letting the stillness wrap around me. A few days later, a letter arrived from Axelon's executive team. Inside was an offer, director of risk and ethics strategy. My own department, my own team. I said yes, not for status, not to prove anything to them, but to build something that didn't require me to shrink in order to be useful. That night, my father called. His voice was hesitant, thin. I heard about the audit. He said, I didn't realize you'd grown into someone who... I stopped him gently. I've always been this person, Dad. You just never looked close enough. There was silence. Then quietly, you're right. I failed you. I didn't need the apology. But hearing it, it felt like stepping out of a storm and realizing for once I'd stayed dry. Some weeks later, Dylan sent a short email. Subject, I'm sorry, body, for the way we made you feel. We're never less. I just didn't want to admit you were more. That was it. But it was enough. Sometimes the best kind of revenge isn't loud. It's simply undeniable.